So I was talking to this product leader the other day, and they were kind of making the argument that if we hire people who are smart enough, we don't actually need teams. We can have people form and swarm at will, completely fungible components in the system. Anyone can be replaced, anyone can work on anything. It's a perfect dream. And I immediately had quite a few suspicions about this because I don't think that is actually how humans work. And there's a reason we've had teams or groups and organizations for all of human history. So today I really want to crack into this myth and figure out, is there any truth to this at all? And how should we think about team sizes and what teams are for in the first place? So the myth goes that we don't need to spend our time thinking about teams or how we structure our teams if we hire really smart people who can just figure everything out on their own. And I know there are product and engineering leaders entertaining these ideas because I've had very senior product and engineering leaders approach me and ask me questions kind of like, hey, if we hired people who are really, really smart, they instantly, like, they knew the domain super well, they knew all the software, they knew all the programming stuff, basically, like they just knew everything going on and they were completely tied in. Would we need a team? And I started to try to figure out what hiring pool these people think they're hiring from because
We are Borg.
I think they're trying to hire the Borg. They want the Borg from Star Trek. And for those of you who don't watch Star Trek, like, the Borg hive mind is this species that every single one of the members shares a collective brain, no matter where they are in the universe. They all think the same thought and they all have instant access to each other's knowledge. But we don't live in that world. We live in a world populated by humans, and software is written by humans, which means our constraints are not the Borg. Our constraints are humans and how do humans work? And what are the constraints around working with humans? And those constraints are actually really important because if you talk to any kind of architect of anything, and I don't just mean building architect or software architect, I mean organizational architect, or somebody who writes a newspaper, or anybody who's designed a thing, the constraints imposed on you by the space you're designing for heavily influence what you're designing. So much of our world is constrained by the concept of gravity and how gravity works on Earth. If we went to Mars, we would have people growing physiologically very different bodies. Our trees are shaped the way they are because we have 9.8 meters per second square downwards. And even our buildings are shaped that way, right? There's a reason that this medieval architecture has flying buttresses coming out the sides of the building. And it's not because they want a cheap laugh. It's because they need the walls not to fall over under the weight of gravity with the materials they had at the time. They were working under constraints of their reality. And so our chief constraint is humans. And so how many humans do you think it is possible for you to interact with at any time? I think it's possible and reasonable to have 6 people interact with each other all the time. But if you double it, it's probably going to be really tricky. Maybe possible, but you're not going to be as effective as you were. And if you double that, it's going to be a nightmare scenario. You cannot have an environment where you expect all of those people to be interacting together all the time. And I'm not saying they will interact like that because I just said the constraint is humans. Humans will not work in that environment. This is an environment where you have everybody working together with everyone all the time. That's a different kind of environment. And again, it makes me wonder, who is it that we're trying to fill the job role with?
What is this?
Is this an organization designed for ants? Have we completely thought that our really smart people are somehow ants, where they're completely fungible and they can change roles very quickly? They don't have to keep track of long-term ownership of stuff. They don't have to keep track of the changes. Their knowledge is eternal and permanent in their minds, because it's not. And we are not hiring ants, and ants don't even work like that because they're ants. And again, I said the constraints of the system will get enforced. So instead of having this hyper dense network of everyone interacting with everyone all the time, you will have reality. The constraints of how humans interact will push back against you. And you'll end up in this situation where Actually, only some subgroup of people are working with each other, which ends up meaning we go back to a small group. Now, it is possible that that group could actually correctly form a really great team, but you need a lot of principles in place before something like that can happen, and it will not happen by accident. You have to guide the organization to that no matter what. Whether you want to do that in an organizational setting based on something like holacracy, where there are no managers and no strict organizational structures and everyone's on equal footing, these teams will still emerge. So the question is, how good are you at defining the environment for fast flow in this setting? And so, assuming I hired smart people, I'm not going to guide them. I'm not going to create the environmental constraints. I'm not going to ensure that things are moving fast, is simply ignoring the problem and either pretending you're hiring ants or the Borg. And the rest of us don't live in some sci-fi universe. We live here on Earth where we work with humans. And so that's just one dimension to this, right? That's the amount of people working with other people. But there's a whole second dimension to this problem, which is how are those people acquiring knowledge, evolving their knowledge as things change? Because if you have a small company with, let's say, 5 engineers and 1 product, it is possible for all of them to acquire really great knowledge about 1 product. But if you end up adding 4 or 5 products and you scatter them across, you'll only have 1 engineer who knows each product really well. And they will lose knowledge about each other's products because those products are evolving without them. And that's more than just the software and the lines of code that they don't know. That's also the product, the positioning in the market, the customer needs, everything in the space around it, the defect backlog. They don't know because they're not working on it. They're working on something else. So I don't know how those developers are going to stay up to date on 4 products they don't know anything about and they're not working on. And to make this more visual, I've programmed a little simulation here that shows you how much knowledge every individual person has acquired and maintained across all products. And that's not just being maintained, oh, I know the lines of code or I've touched it before. It's I am up to date with that thing because those products are being changed underneath their feet. And as they acquire new knowledge about something else, they are forgetting things about that product in the past slowly. So in this one organization, you have people all working on 1 product and they all work on it together and they all know what the thing is and how it works together because they're all up to date with the changes. They're all up to date with what's going on in the market. They're all up to date with positioning, sales, issues like that. And then all of a sudden, something changes in the environment. Overnight, they hire a new person and they add a new product and they say, okay, we're going to move some people over to that new product and keep some people on there. Oh, by the way, we're going to add a new product as well because we need to do market expansion. It's really important. We have to expand in the market. And you know what? We need even just 1 more product to keep this thing going. I know it's a lot, but you're smart people. You're going to figure it out. And so now we have 2 people on 4, 2 people on 3. Nobody's working on 2 anymore. It ended up being a bit of a dead end right now. And a few people are still on 1. And as that's changing has happened, people who were on that product, right? People 2, 3, and 4, they've lost a lot of knowledge. And they say, okay, well, let's shift gears now quickly, put those people from 3 and 4 back onto 2, because now that market opportunity is opened up again. So let's get product 2 going. Okay, now we shifted gears again. There's a new need. People are fungible. We can change things really quickly. Let's put some more people back on 3 and 4. It's like everybody's kind of forgotten about this thing. Person 1, you know your thing. Person 2, you know your thing. Person 3, you know your thing. And so the point of this is to show you how quickly you can lose all that investment because every time you have somebody work on something, you're investing in them getting better at that thing, knowing more about that domain, more about that code base, more about that product, closer to the customer. And if they don't stay on something for some length of time, the most you can expect for is a very shallow level of understanding of things. And in fact, the simulation is very optimistic because there's a lot of factors I didn't program into it, such as the social cohesion between people being an asset or a detriment to building up knowledge quickly or ramping up beyond the person who knows the most, right? If everyone on the team has only reached 5, it's going to require additional deeper effort. You're going to have to do archaeology. You're going to have to kick doors down. You're going to have to go digging to find out how do I get to the next level beyond everyone's knowledge in this team because there's nobody to teach you what's going on. And so the constant having to relearn everything is this eternal lost knowledge in your company. You are paying people to forget the things that you paid them to learn when you have these unstable teams and unstable assignments. Some level of change is fine, but at some point very early on, you dilute the pool so heavily, you're just throwing your money out the door. And I know it's attractive to think like, okay, well, we're just going to follow the industry best practice. We're just going to hire people who know all the best practices and they know how to do everything correctly. But there's probably not a best practice for what's going on. People have to coalesce and gel in a team to learn those things correctly. As an analogy for making things work together, think about, you have a crew on a super yacht and they might be a fantastic crew, but if you're changing them out for another fantastic crew, which is not a yacht crew, but a construction crew, they're not going to know how to operate that yacht. It doesn't mean they're bad construction workers. They could be the best construction workers in the world, but they're doing something they don't know how to do. And it doesn't mean they can't learn how to do it. I am sure that a construction team could figure out how to pilot a yacht. However, you're paying for that ramp up time again. And then just think again, like what situation is that yacht in? Because it only makes sense in certain contexts. Most of these billionaires with yachts, they're not riding those yachts across the Atlantic Ocean. They're parked in shallow waters off a coast because the Atlantic Ocean is super choppy. You don't take the yacht into the canals of Amsterdam thinking you're going to drive it through there because the boat is too big to fit into there. Even though the canals of Amsterdam are very nice, lots of people drive their boats through it, they enjoy it. You're not going to take this thing in there. It's the same thing. You can't take the yacht and drive it down the German Autobahn. It doesn't make any sense. And so even though you think you have the best crew in some context, it doesn't mean you can swap it out and put it into a new context. It doesn't mean you can take the architecture and apply it to a context that doesn't make sense for it. All those things, the people, the process, the technology, the product, everything, the whole socio-technical system needs to work together to make this thing work correctly. So if we go back and think about teams, what the team is really doing for us is it's setting up a boundary around what is possible for a group of people under the constraints imposed on us by reality, like how do people work when they engage with very complicated topics over a long period of time. And those complicated topics having a boundary around how much cognitive load fits into this group, how much knowledge do the people in this group have on that topic, how long can we build stability in there. That ends up being very useful when we want to have more than a very shallow level of understanding throughout the organization. And we know what happens when we have shallow levels of understanding permanently in our company, which is, first of all, we're slow. Second of all, there's no innovation happening. Everything has to be top down, which leads to frustrated company level leadership saying, why aren't they taking ownership for this? Why didn't they think of these things? They don't seem to know the product, which leads to a whole vicious cycle of removing autonomy from them and treating them like fungible ants or Borg drones. We want to have depth of knowledge in our teams so our teams can get innovative and creative, so they can solve deeper problems that you need to get beyond the surface level to do. And yes, of course, if you change teams, you will always retain some knowledge of what you worked on before, but it degrades, especially as you're working on something else, but especially as somebody else is changing that thing and you can't keep up to date with it because there's more products being changed than what you can think about. And sure, they can write documents or they can explain it to you, but you're paying for that. And that's not the same level of quality knowledge retained in a person's mind as somebody who's working on that thing directly over a longer period of time because they have a stable team. And I'm not saying hiring smart people who figure this out or have past experience in the domain or with your technology won't help either. Of course, this will help. When you have these fungible teams where nobody's actually in a stable environment, you have forced in an artificial constraint where nobody can actually produce the results that justify their high price point. You have created a system where nobody can actually produce the high level of results that you expected when you signed off on giving them a high paycheck. So you're just throwing out your own money. So this inattention to creating healthy containers around long-lived, stable teams, not permanent teams, not eternal teams, just long enough that you don't throw out your own money on constant reacquisition of knowledge. This is one of the biggest reasons, in my opinion, from a financial perspective, that you should have teams in your company. And I've only scratched the surface on the problems here. There's other problems too, such as how do I find out about a system that I haven't worked on? Who do I go and talk to? Like, you probably can't talk to anyone because, as we saw in the simulation, most of the company's not going to know that thing. And it's actually even worse because in the simulation, nobody was fired, nobody went on vacation, nobody quit. Everything was perfect all the time. And in a perfect situation, it was an absolute nightmare for knowledge retention. And so chasing some pipe dream of if we just hire smart enough people, we will be able to avoid having to design an organization that works and makes sense. It's a very elaborate way to keep your costs as high as possible while minimizing the value and throwing out all the human potential that's inside of your organization. So I think this is, for me, the big point here. So I'm pretty happy to say that this is a busted myth. You cannot simply hire smart people. You should hire smart people. For me, it's like that Einstein quote that you can't judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, except in your organization, when you have these fungible pools of developers who are swarming masses all the time, the environment is completely hostile to stability and fast flow. So please, for the sake of your own balance sheet, don't do this. So what did we discover today about teams and how they work together and why we have them in the first place? I think the first thing that's really obvious is teams are almost a necessity if we want to set some boundary around cognitive load in a way that allows people to exceed the surface level knowledge of what's going on in a system, to allow them to actually build deep knowledge of something and maintain with that over time. And it's not only about the topic, it's about the evolving of that topic and the long-term stewardship of it, plus keeping track of all the changes to it that happen over time. So it's incredibly essential that we have this boundary of a team full of people we can trust so that we can reach high levels of excellence in the first place. And that's something we need if we actually want to have innovative capabilities inside of our teams where they go above and beyond and they're not simply filling out Jira tickets that are handed down to them, because that's what our organizational design is kind of forcing on them, is pushing down the level they can reach. The kind of innovation, the kind of ownership that they can have is squashed down by default because that's how humans work, right? We're not working with the Borg hive mind from Star Trek. We're not working with ants. We are humans working on incredibly complicated systems. And those systems are evolving every day. So I think this myth is busted, right? If we only hire smart people, we still have to have teams to put them somewhere. If we exclusively hire the smartest people in the world, we still have to have a system that can allow them to reach their heights. And as we saw from things like simulating how knowledge is retained and knowledge churns under people's feet when they're not looking and somebody else is working on it, we have to have the system set up correctly for them to do that work long term. Otherwise, we're keeping what the organization is capable of pushed down. And actually, in essence, we're kind of spending a lot of money on engineers only to waste more than half of it simply by this churning froth of knowledge being lost every day. So yeah, myth busted. And hey, if you want to find out when the next video is coming out, don't forget to like and subscribe so you get that notification. See you next time.